Sister Abhaya was found at the bottom of a convent well, but the real mystery began long before her body was discovered. What looked like a tragic accident slowly unraveled into a case filled with silence, hidden movements, and unanswered questions. For 28 years, the truth remained buried, waiting for time to expose what fear had concealed. The morning began like any other, quiet and controlled, wrapped in the calm routine of the convent. The sun rose slowly, casting pale light across stone corridors that echoed with emptiness. Nothing seemed out of place at first, yet there was an uneasy stillness in the air. Birds circled above the courtyard, but their sounds felt distant, almost muted. Somewhere within the compound, something had already gone terribly wrong. When the well was noticed, it drew attention without explanation. Its surface was disturbed, unlike the untouched calm it usually held. As people gathered closer, fear replaced confusion. Floating in the dark water was the body of Sister Abhaya. Her presence there made no sense. She was known for discipline, awareness, and strict routine. The well was not a place she would approach carelessly, especially at that hour. Panic spread quietly, not through screams, but through hurried steps and nervous glances. The location of the body raised questions immediately. The area around the well showed signs of disturbance that could not be ignored. Objects nearby were not where they usually were. The stillness of the convent now felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets. Authorities were informed, and soon the space filled with unfamiliar movement. Yet even as the scene was examined, something important was already slipping away. The urgency to find answers was missing. The death was treated as simple, almost expected, despite the growing signs that suggested otherwise. What should have been a careful investigation turned into a rushed conclusion. That morning did not just mark the loss of a life. It marked the beginning of a mystery that would refuse to stay buried. The well became more than a place of discovery. It became the first warning that the truth had been pushed into darkness, waiting to resurface. The investigation began with confidence, but that confidence quickly turned into carelessness. Officers arrived at the convent and looked at the scene through the lens of convenience rather than caution. The idea of an accident was accepted almost instantly, and once that assumption settled in, everything else was shaped to fit it. The well was examined briefly, but the surrounding ground was disturbed before proper records were made. Footprints faded, positions changed, and silent details disappeared forever. Important observations were written down without depth. Injuries on the body were mentioned, but never questioned. The condition of clothing raised concerns, yet those concerns were brushed aside. The timing of events was loosely estimated, leaving gaps that no one tried to close. Instead of asking how this could happen, the focus shifted to how quickly it could be closed. Speed became more important than truth. Files were prepared with missing pieces, and those missing pieces were ignored as insignificant. Witness information was collected casually, without verification or follow-up. Small contradictions were treated as confusion rather than warning signs. Every overlooked detail weakened the foundation of the case. By labeling the death as a fall, the investigation reached an ending it had not earned. That decision created a barrier that blocked further questioning. Once the case was marked complete, challenging it became difficult. Doubt was dismissed as unnecessary noise. This first mistake did more damage than any lost evidence. It shaped years of delay, denial, and silence. The truth was not destroyed that day, but it was buried under official certainty, waiting for someone brave enough to dig it back out. Years passed, but the case refused to fade away. Small details that were once ignored began to resurface, unsettling those who had accepted the early conclusion. Reports from the initial investigation were reread, and inconsistencies became harder to dismiss. Injuries mentioned briefly in old records did not match the explanation of an accidental fall. The placement of the body raised questions that had never been properly answered. Even the depth of the well conflicted with the supposed sequence of events. Independent reviews brought attention to objects found near the scene. Some items appeared misplaced, suggesting movement before the body entered the well. These details had been recorded but never explored. At the time, they were treated as coincidences. Now, they felt deliberate. The more the evidence was revisited, the clearer it became that the story told in official files was incomplete. Witness accounts added further confusion. Statements given close to the incident differed from those recorded later. Timelines shifted without explanation. Certain movements inside the convent during the early hours were unclear, yet no effort had been made to clarify them. The gaps were not random. They followed a pattern of avoidance. Public interest grew slowly, driven by unanswered questions rather than new discoveries. Journalists, legal observers, and concerned citizens began to demand explanations. Each attempt to silence the discussion only strengthened suspicion. The case survived because it never made sense. These clues did not scream for attention. They whispered, quietly but persistently. And over time, those whispers became impossible to ignore, signaling that the truth had never died, only been neglected. As time moved forward, the case entered a phase where nothing seemed to happen, yet everything was quietly changing. Officially, the matter was closed, but unease remained beneath the surface. Files were stored away, revisited only when questions became too loud to ignore. Each year that passed made the truth harder to reach. Memories faded, witnesses grew distant, and some disappeared entirely. What was once fresh and urgent slowly turned into a forgotten record. This silence was not accidental. Attempts to reopen the case were met with hesitation and delay. Requests for reviews were redirected, postponed, or quietly rejected. Important documents were found incomplete, while others showed signs of alteration. The absence of clear answers began to feel intentional. The longer the silence lasted, the more it suggested that someone benefited from it. Public trust weakened as explanations remained vague. People began to notice that this case was treated differently from others. It was not allowed to move forward, nor was it allowed to fully disappear. Instead, it remained suspended, trapped between denial and truth. This strange stillness created frustration, but it also created determination. Pressure slowly built outside official circles. Discussions continued in private spaces, fueled by doubt and unresolved questions. The silence did not erase suspicion, it strengthened it. Each unanswered request added weight to the belief that the truth was being held back, not lost. Time became both an obstacle and a witness. While it damaged evidence, it also revealed patterns of avoidance. The case survived not because it was supported, but because it was resisted. In that resistance, people found reason to keep searching, believing that silence itself had become the strongest proof that something was wrong. The direction of the case changed when investigators began to look inward rather than outward. Earlier theories focused on accidents and unknown intruders, but those ideas slowly collapsed under closer inspection. Records showed that movement within the convent during the critical hours did not align with official routines. Certain areas that were supposed to be locked showed signs of use. Paths that were ignored before now appeared intentional. These were not random irregularities, but connected actions. Attention shifted to internal access, timing, and opportunity. The layout of the building revealed how easily someone familiar with the space could move unseen. The well was no longer viewed as a place of chance, but as a chosen location. The distance, the visibility, and the effort required pointed toward planning rather than impulse. What once seemed impossible now felt logical. Old documents were examined again, this time without assumptions. A pattern emerged showing selective focus during the first investigation. Some details were emphasized while others were quietly minimized. This selective attention suggested protection, not negligence. The idea that the truth was hidden out of loyalty or fear began to take shape. As connections formed, the case took on a darker tone. It was no longer about a single moment of violence, but about what followed afterward. Decisions made in panic had long-lasting consequences. The attempt to preserve an image may have led to the destruction of a life and the burial of truth. This hidden connection did not rely on a single piece of evidence. It was built from structure, access, and silence. Together, they formed a clearer picture, one that pointed away from chance and directly toward responsibility that had been ignored for far too long. As the case was reconstructed piece by piece, the official story began to fall apart. Timelines that once seemed acceptable could no longer exist side by side. Events overlapped in ways that defied logic, creating gaps that could not be explained by memory loss or simple error. When investigators tried to place each action in order, they discovered moments that had no clear origin and others that ended without conclusion. The sequence of that night was broken. Scientific analysis added further pressure to the narrative. Injuries documented years earlier were examined with modern understanding, and their nature contradicted earlier assumptions. The marks suggested force rather than impact, resistance rather than surrender. The body's condition told a story that paperwork had ignored. It became clear that the fall was not the cause, but a consequence. The location of the well gained new meaning. Its distance from living areas, the lack of noise reported, and the absence of immediate reaction pointed toward deliberate timing. This was not a sudden accident discovered instantly. Time had passed between the critical event and the final act. That delay mattered. It showed choice. Small inconsistencies now appeared deliberate. Changes in reports were no longer mistakes, but corrections made to protect an earlier version of events. Each correction weakened credibility instead of strengthening it. The more the story was examined, the less it held together. At this stage, the truth did not arrive as a dramatic revelation. It emerged quietly, through collapse. One assumption after another failed, until only one possibility remained. What happened that night was not confusion or chance. It was an act followed by fear, and fear followed by concealment. After 28 years, the case reached a moment many believed would never come. What reopened it was not a single dramatic confession or a sudden discovery, but persistence. Old evidence was brought back into focus using methods that did not exist when the case first began. Reports that once seemed ordinary were now examined with precision, and the conclusions they supported changed completely. What had been dismissed for decades suddenly carried weight. Scientific reviews confirmed that the earlier explanation could not stand. The injuries, the sequence of events, and the condition of the scene aligned with one conclusion only. The death was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate violence, followed by a carefully staged attempt to mislead investigators. The well was no longer seen as the place where everything happened, but as the final step in hiding what had already occurred. Testimonies that once conflicted were reassessed side by side. Patterns emerged where confusion once existed. Delays, omissions, and altered details now formed a clear trail. The silence that protected the truth for years finally worked against it. Each effort to suppress facts became evidence of intent. When the case was officially declared solved, the announcement carried mixed emotions. Relief came with regret. Justice had arrived, but far too late. Time had taken away the chance for immediate accountability, yet it had failed to erase the truth. The resolution proved one powerful reality. Truth does not depend on speed. Even buried under fear, authority, and silence, it waits. And when it surfaces, it does so with clarity that no delay can destroy. What remained after the case was declared solved was not satisfaction, but reflection. The truth had finally surfaced, yet it arrived carrying the weight of everything that had been lost along the way. Time had taken its toll on evidence, on memories, and on the possibility of true closure. What justice achieved after so many years felt incomplete, shaped as much by absence as by answers. The resolution closed a file, but it could not restore what silence had stolen. The place where it all began stood unchanged, quiet and ordinary, offering no sign of the history buried within it. For many, that stillness became unsettling. It served as a reminder that wrongdoing does not always leave visible scars. Sometimes it survives through neglect, protected by routine and authority rather than force. The case exposed how easily truth can be delayed when systems fail to question themselves. Sister Abhaya's story became larger than the crime itself. It stood as proof that persistence can outlast power, and that unanswered questions do not disappear simply because time passes. The decades of denial revealed how fear and reputation can become obstacles to justice, turning silence into a shield. Though the truth eventually emerged, it asked an uncomfortable question. How many other stories remain unresolved, not because they lack evidence, but because they lack courage? The end of this case did not erase its pain. Instead, it transformed it into warning. What remained was not just a solved mystery, but a lesson. Truth may sink deep, but it does not dissolve. It waits, patient and unchanging, until someone is willing to face it.